anything that sounded like pirates or Treasure Island or any kind of voyage to the center of the earth or anything like that. And so I grabbed this book called, Voyage to the Sea of Cortez, because I thought it was that. And it wasn't that. It was the story of these two guys, a scientist and a writer, who were great friends and had this great adventure. And I read the book, and it was over my head at the time, but what I got out of it is like, man, you could go with your buddies to a cool place and do cool things, and it was a job, and it's like, sign me up for that. And so I read all the other Steinbeck books I could get a hold of, and I became kind of immersed in the whole story. And slowly I got more involved with learning about Ricketts, who was a very influential person. He was a really interesting guy, and it kind of affected everybody that got near him. And he ran this little lab in Monterey called Pacific Biologic. And he would collect specimens for high schools and college. So he'd go out and catch, sea anemones or octopus or whatever the science department in some high school in Kansas wanted, he would send them. So he had this little practice, but people would come by just to talk to him because he was such an interesting person. One of the people that came by and was influenced by him was this guy named Joseph Campbell, who listened to his stories and got kind of enthusiastic about some of his cultural knowledge as well as his science. And he wrote the book, which is called Hero with 1,000 Faces. And it's basically the story of how every culture on Earth has this sort of Homer's Odyssey story where somebody goes on an adventure and they come back and they have all this knowledge. And, he wrote this book, and that book influenced George Lucas to write Star Wars. So
oh, wow.
The whole Star Wars, you can trace it back to that little dingy lab in Monterey. So the ripples of the effect of both Steinbeck and Ricketts go out far and wide. And that's the way it was with me. I was always interested in the story and kind of quietly looked for the boat for many years and couldn't find it. And finally, the captain on the boat when it went down the Sea of Cortez in 1940 was this guy named Tony Berry. And he was still alive in like the mid 90s. And his nephew was looking for the boat as well, and asked the old captain, how did, I can't find a boat. It's changed its name. And Tony said, "Oh, the radio call letters never change on a boat, even if the name changes." So this guy went to his name's Bob Ania, went to Washington and checked with the Coast Guard and found the boat, and it was in Washington. So it was renamed the Gemini because back in the 60s, the guy that owned the boat was one of that's when the whole, right before the Apollo program, it was the Gemini program. So they're real interested in the space stuff. So renamed the boat, and that's why none of us could find it. So
the interest in this boat, I think I was blown away as I started reading more about it. When I first, stumbled into this, I thought, oh, cool, this is a boat that, a wealthy author had built for his adventure to go to Baja. And obviously I was very wrong there. Although I did read that Steinbeck used proceeds from Grapes of Wrath to charter the boat, but turns out he chartered just literally a fishing boat. And then I was more intrigued to realize that when this epic journey was over with, it went back to just being a working fishing boat. So some time had to pass, obviously, before you, and it appears quite a few other people, began to look back and go, hey, wait a minute, it's not a fishing boat, or it was a fishing boat, but really it's a relic, and let's go find it. It's interesting that actually took place, and was the fact that other people were looking for it, was it connected to the John Steinbeck story, or was it just because it was a cool boat?
Just because it was a Steinbeck boat. And I had no idea that this big effort was going on by the community in Monterey to find the boat. I thought it was a kind of a little vanity project that I was doing by myself. And I looked on and
There's more vain people in the world besides you.
Well, it's probably my age. I just didn't Google it, it would have all appeared, but my reptile brain, I was just sort of talking to people trying to find it.
Right.
it's a weird thing. The boat does and since I've become involved in it, I can't believe the number of people that are into the story. I got a letter yesterday, actually a whole box from a guy in Australia, and he, was telling me how much the book meant to him.
Wow.
But I get calls every week from marine biologists that say they were, inspired to go into science because of the book, and we get visitors, like 5 or 10 visitors a day come to the boat. And a lot of Europeans, for some reason, a lot of Germans come there. I guess it was translated early into German. So a lot of people are really into the whole story. The boat kind of had a pretty cool life after that. It had this sort of duplicitous, nature where it would go out and alternately explore and then exploit the ocean. It was a very well built fishing boat, but it was like a hunter killer. Like, it was really efficient at catching fish. So
sure,
it after they fished out the anchovies and sardines in Monterey Bay, it went up to off the coast of Seattle and fished this thing they called the ocean perch, which was really a kind of an orange rockfish, a cod that they were really old. So they were 70-year-old fish, and they fished them out really quickly. In fact, there's one of the seamen that was on the flyer back in those days. I talked to him, and he told me one time they had 70 tons of this ocean perch in the hold of the flyer, and the captain radioed in about the price at the dock, and they said it was a penny a pound, and they were using it for mink food. So it wasn't worth him going back to dock. So he unloaded all the fish
wow,
at sea, and they all their swim bladders had exploded, so they were floating, and as far as you could see, there were these 70-year-old fish floating and just being wasted. So
oh wow.
After that, it got hired by what became U.S. Fish and Game to do this study about the depletion of some of the fisheries, and so it went out and did all these test trawls, and they used that information to make the Magnuson Act, which basically pushed our economic and fishing border from 3 miles out to 200 miles. And the flyer was the boat that they used to gather the data to make that law. So it had this weird life, afterwards, where it would, it was, and all these fisheries would be, all the fishermen would kind of follow each other. They'd go and they'd all hear about somebody catching, red crab up in Alaska, and they'd all go up there and they'd concentrate on it. And so this pattern emerged where about every 8 years they would basically collapse a fishery wherever they went, because they all went like a pack. And so the life it had after the Sea of Cortez was interesting, but I didn't know any of that till I got the boat. Yeah.
You'd be interested to know, a couple weeks ago I had a gentleman by the name of Matias Arjona on the podcast, and he is a Mexican resident in Ensenada, a longtime friend of mine, but he's also the Secretary of Fish and Game for Baja, and he is also a consultant to what was once Mitsubishi, but it's changed hands, but the tuna rings that are there in the bay outside of Ensenada. That's a relatively, I think in the last 12 years or so is when the Japanese have come over and they're farming tuna there now.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Well, so the past is of this boat is colorful, with interesting people. It's now in where it should be, it sounds. And I've done a little bit of reading and saw that the bandsaw that is a 100-year-old bandsaw that was used originally to build this boat somehow was found and is now in the shop that is repairing the boat. I think I read somewhere that at one point you were hoping for a relaunch sometime in 18, which we're past 18, and then I think I read another one that said the fall of 19. Are we going to hit the fall of 19, or is that extending?
It'll be relaunched maybe in 19. It won't have all of its stuff done on it yet. It turned out to be much more difficult to put this boat back together than I thought, like most projects like this are. It got declared a national historic place, and so that required a bunch more documentation and sort of laser scanning everything, every inch of it, and making sure that we were thoughtful in what we replaced and what we left there. So it complicated but made the project better too. So
yeah, for sure.
It's definitely a thing that's taken more time. But
we're definitely going to do this at the end of the show, but since we've got people that may end up not hearing the entire thing, let's do this twice, and that is this is a foundation. I do believe you are taking donations for this, correct? And there's a direction that we'll get into, but just, again, so we can get it twice on the show, if we're interested in this, I believe I went to westernflyer.org, and it's spelled exactly how it sounds, WSTERNFLYER.org. And there's a ton of information, links to videos, and so on. Am I correct in saying that you are seeking donations for the restoration, and then eventually the program that I'm hoping you'll explain here next? Is that correct, that you are taking donations?
Yeah. And it's not something that we spend a lot of time with. I quickly realized that this there's a lot of boats, and you're probably aware of this too, that boats are synonymous with guys' dreams a lot of times, and there's a lot of boats in backyards that will never get near the water. These guys have dreams of sailing around the world or going to the South Pacific or whatever, but they're just dreams. And so I think because the state that the Flyer was in when I got it, it was like people were like, "There's no way this thing's going to ever float again."
It's just another dream.
And so I thought, okay, I got to put my money where my mouth is, and I got to at least bring it back to a seaworthy vessel before I'm going to get too animated about raising money, because otherwise people are just like, "Yeah, right,"
Sure,
that's
sure.
But so I'm not unhappy with that, and then. We eventually, the program that we've put together for the education program and the life of the boat after it's restored, it's kind of an expensive thing. It's going to be a couple $1 million a year. So I would like the foundation to come up with that, because I don't want it to be personality driven and be so tied with me that if, I go under a bus that it all stops. So I, that hopefully that'll happen in good time.
So I read through I've basically read through the entire website, and there's tons of information there. So people that are interested, please go and check it out. But and I'm an older father of a almost 6-year-old, a sister who is a marine biologist and 10 times smarter than me. But I'm at a point in life where I am questioning all things education. I've been through the process. I'm certainly not going to tell you that I'm an idiot, and I'm not going to tell you I'm a genius either. But I look at and my mom was a school teacher for 30 plus years. So have a child, have a brilliant sister, and I went to school. My mom's a teacher, and I can say this with confidence that our education system is broken today. The public education system is broken. And one of the key things as a guy who has supported himself and his family, not necessarily, I have an office job, but I'm proud to say that my father raised me as a very hands-on type of person. I fix things. I know how to fix things, and mechanical things don't scare me. I don't throw stuff away. And I love when I read or hear about education that is going beyond, or education efforts that are going beyond just reading and or somebody standing in front lecturing. And I think those days are over with anyways. So what I envision through reading and seeing pictures of what you've got going on here is an opportunity for students to get real hands-on experience in the science world by participating with, I'm assuming, different types of scientific endeavors, but all based around being on this boat and collecting information while on the boat, just like at some point we can say 100 years ago Steinbeck and Ricketts did. Is that am I doing a good job of summarizing all of that? And hopefully you can make it sound prettier.
Very good job. I got 4 kids, and 3 of them are in college, and I totally agree with you. The whole education system is just completely broken. Kids don't learn from a teacher droning on at a blackboard anymore. They watch a YouTube video or listen to a podcast. The whole education system is just being left behind. And my 15-year-old came home a couple years ago from a